Hey guys, today we step into a world where potatoes don't exist. No fries, no mashed anything, and definitely no shepherd's pie. Instead, imagine a muddy field somewhere in 13th century England, where a hunched-over peasant tugs at the roots of a plant most modern kitchens haven't seen in centuries. It's not glamorous, it's not trendy, but back then, this little crop was everything. Food, medicine, rent payment, and survival rolled into one slightly wrinkled pod. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now picture this, a medieval harvest scene, the air thick with the scent of turned earth, women in russet and indigo skirts bundling plants into sacks, and children stomping the cold out of their boots while stealing pods to snack on. This isn't wheat, it's not barley, it's field peas, the ancient ancestor of split peas, chickpeas, and the dried peas you probably only see now in soup or vaguely terrifying school lunches. Long before potatoes sailed in from the New World, Europeans leaned heavily on this unassuming legume. Field peas were a staple crop across much of the continent, prized not for their glamour, but for their pure, gritty reliability. They didn't need rich soil. They could survive cold snaps. They could even grow in places where wheat withered and rye sulked. If medieval farming had a tier list, field peas were S tier. One mainstream historical fact, peas were so vital that they were commonly used as part of rent or feudal dues. You didn't just owe your lord a coin, you might owe him 2 sacks of dried peas at harvest time. Not because he was craving stew, but because everyone knew they stored well and could feed dozens during a bad winter. And the thing is, people actually liked them. Peas weren't just famine food. Monasteries used them in soups, thickened with leeks and garlic. Soldiers carried them dried into battle and cooked them with salted pork. Peasant tables featured them boiled, mashed, and sometimes even baked into dense, earthy loaves. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some medieval wedding feasts included sweetened pea pudding. That's right, sugar, honey, and peas. Possibly the ancestor of the modern mushy peas we politely ignore in British pubs. Historians still argue whether the cultural reverence for peas was purely pragmatic or tinged with spiritual symbolism. Some chroniclers associated their resilience with Christian humility. Others just thought they were good filler food for when the bread ran out. Regardless, the field pea earned its place. In a world teetering on the edge of famine every winter, where one bad rain could mean disaster, this humble pod kept entire regions fed. Forget tubers. Peas were the quiet heroes of survival. And the odd thing, they were everywhere. From the icy marshes of Scandinavia to the wind-blasted coasts of Ireland, peas flourished. You could dry them, smash them, ferment them. Heck, you could even drink them if you were desperate enough and handy with a cauldron. Before potatoes ever rolled into European fields, the medieval table already had a powerhouse, and it came wrapped in a pale green husk. In villages tucked between forests and fens, and on estates sprawled across the English countryside, the field pea reigned supreme. Not because it was glamorous, far from it, but because it was reliable. And in the medieval world, reliability was better than gold. Peas were the people's crop. They didn't demand pampering. They thrived in marginal soils, those patchy, exhausted fields where noble grains went to sulk. They fixed nitrogen into the dirt, which made them beloved by farmers who didn't know what nitrogen was. Only that planting peas seemed to bless the soil the next year. The land liked them. So did the pigs. So did the monks. And so did the tax collectors. You'd find them in castle gardens, trailing their tendrils up rudimentary trellises near the cabbage patches. You'd find them in peasant plots, scattered among leeks and turnips. Even noble estates rotated peas into their crop schedules, not just for peasant sustenance, but as livestock feed. Dried peas soaked overnight became porridge for both people and pigs, though hopefully not in the same pot. One mainstream historical fact, field peas were so widespread that they were written into the Capitular de Villis, an imperial decree from Charlemagne himself, outlining which crops should be grown across his empire. That's not just a king's suggestion, that's a royal agricultural policy, and peas made the cut. Why? because they did everything. Fresh peas in spring meant a rare splash of green on the table after a long winter of root vegetables and salt meat. Dried peas kept all year, and they travelled well, making them perfect for armies, monasteries, and famine relief. They weren't flashy, but they were foundational, and the labour involved was relatively low. No need for heavy grinding like wheat. No need for complex baking. You boiled them, mashed them, added salt if you had any, maybe a scrap of onion, and that was dinner. Not thrilling, but it didn't try to kill you. Here's your fringe tidbit. Some English manors used field peas as part of the boon meal, a meal granted to labourers after long days of work, like harvest or haymaking. Imagine earning your bowl of pea pottage after scything barley under the midsummer sun. You wouldn't complain. You'd slurp and pray for seconds. Historians still argue whether peas held more cultural value in monastic life or peasant life. Monks praise their simplicity and nutrition, perfect for fasting. Peasants praise their abundance and ease. One thing's for sure, both groups counted on them to survive lean times. Even town markets had their pea vendors. You could buy them by the sack, swap them for eggs, or cut them home in a clay pot. In some places, you could rent out kitchen space just to boil your own. They were a currency of the kitchen, a language everyone understood. In an age when crop failures meant hunger riots, peas were the insurance policy growing quietly under everyone's nose. They didn't boast, they didn't bloom with drama, but they never let anyone down. And that, more than anything, made them indispensable. As the pot bubbles over the fire, steam curls upward, thick with the smell of salted water and something green, earthy, and oddly comforting. That's a pot of field peas, and in medieval Europe, it was as close to a superfood as most people got. Forget kale or quinoa. Peas were packed with protein and fibre at a time when meat was expensive, eggs were seasonal, and dairy couldn't always be trusted not to turn on you. A bowl of pottage, thick, mushy, and absolutely beige, wasn't just fuel. It was survival disguised as sludge. On lean, fast days, when meat was forbidden and fish too costly, monks and commoners alike turned to peas, rich in calories, surprisingly satisfying, and able to absorb the flavour of whatever herbs you happened to scrounge up. Peas filled bellies and ticked boxes on religious calendars. One mainstream historical fact: during Lent and other fasts, peas were a sanctioned substitute that let people honour the church without passing out in the fields. But it wasn't just about fullness, it was about function. People noticed that pea-heavy meals helped the sick recover faster, or at least didn't make them worse. Healers began recommending peas for patients with fevers, gout, or general wasting. Some herbals even listed peas as good for the humours, which basically meant won't kill you, probably helpful. Still, they had their quirky tidbit incoming. In parts of France and Flanders, it was believed that eating peas on certain saint days could predict fertility. If your pea soup bubbled vigorously on St. Bridget's Eve, it was said you'd have a bountiful year, crops, babies, the whole medieval jackpot. Some even tossed dried peas into bonfires as part of spring rites, hoping to bless their fields. Were they desperate? Absolutely. Were they wrong? Maybe not. Historians still argue whether the nutritional value of peas was fully understood, or whether their popularity was more about availability. Some claim monks experimented with different soaking times and herbal blends to maximize digestibility. Others say people just ate them because they were cheap, and no one really thought about vitamins. But either way, peas earned their place as medicine, meal, and myth. In the kitchens of abbeys, you'd find cauldrons of boiling peas stirred with carved oaken paddles. In rural cottages, women mashed them with wild garlic, maybe stirring in a cracked egg if fortune smiled that day. Some dishes thickened with breadcrumbs. Others went minimalist, just water, peas, and patience. And when someone was sick, what did you bring? Not flowers, not wine. You brought a bowl of hot pea broth, maybe with a crust of rye bread to soak in it. It didn't cure much, but it gave the body something to cling to. It said, "You're not alone," which, frankly, in the Middle Ages, was half the battle. This wasn't luxury cuisine. This was peasant pragmatism with a hint of tenderness. A crop that filled every gap between hunger and health, between seasons, between paydays. A crop that made itself at home in the pot and in the body, and it tasted fine. Better with leeks, best with bacon, but even plain, it beat starving. Every time. But then, quietly, without much fuss, the field pea began to vanish. It didn't go out with a bang. There was no great anti-pea rebellion, no decree from the king banning legumes. It simply faded, pushed slowly off the plate by shinier, starchier newcomers from far-off lands. One generation boiled peas for every meal. The next reached for potatoes. And just like that, a crop that once fed kingdoms slipped into footnotes. The 16th century marked the beginning of the end. The Columbian Exchange flooded Europe with unfamiliar foods. Tomatoes, maize, beans, and most devastatingly for the humble pea, potatoes. They were denser, more calorie-rich, and best of all, they came with a sense of novelty. A fresh start in a rough era. Potatoes grew underground, away from birds and frost. They yielded more food per acre than peas ever could. They didn't need trellises or pods to dry in the sun. Suddenly, peas looked fussy, high maintenance, old-fashioned, and fashion matters. Even in farming, nobles wanted new imports for their lavish feasts. Townspeople followed trends. Even peasants were tempted by the promise of bigger harvests with less labor. What was once an everyday staple became fallback food. What you planted only when you couldn't afford anything else. One mainstream historical fact: by the late 17th century, field peas had largely disappeared from elite menus and were relegated to poor food or animal fodder status in many parts of Europe. The same dried peas that once paid rent were now tossed to pigs. Here's your fringe tidbit. In some areas, especially parts of Eastern Europe, peas were considered bad luck crops by the 18th century. Folklore claimed that planting them after the new moon would trap sorrow in the soil. Whether superstition followed practicality or the other way around, we may never know. Historians still argue whether this decline was due more to economic shifts or culinary evolution. Some point to the Industrial Revolution's changing food systems. Peas didn't can well, didn't ship easily, and couldn't compete with processed grains. Others say it was simply a matter of taste. By then, Europe had developed a hunger for variety, and peas had nothing left to prove. Ironically, the very thing that made peas perfect, how well they stored, may have doomed them in a world now flush with fresh imports, faster transport, and rising expectations. People didn't want reliable anymore. They wanted delicious. And yet, the plant persisted. Quietly, on the fringes, in the back gardens of old women who remembered how to soak them properly, in the fields of stubborn farmers who still believed in crop rotation, in the pages of cookbooks, so old they cracked when opened. But in public, on tables, peas were no longer the pride of the pot. They had become a memory. You won't find field peas in your local grocery aisle, not the real ones. You might find split peas in a plastic bag or mashed into the background of a processed soup. But the full-bodied, earthy, medieval kind, the ones with history in every pod, they've become something close to extinct in daily cuisine. And the saddest part, no one noticed them leaving. Still, the field pea might not be finished just yet. Across eco-farms in Scotland, among seed savers in the Balkans, and inside research plots at agricultural universities, this ancient crop is quietly sprouting again. No longer a peasant's fallback or a monk's Lenten staple. It's re-emerging as something new, a climate-friendly, protein-packed, historically rich superfood. Who would have guessed? The revival started slow, a few curious chefs trying to recreate authentic medieval stews, some preppers looking for resilient crops. Researchers noticed the pea's low water requirements and high soil enrichment, especially useful in areas suffering from drought or over-farming. Turns out, the field pea might be exactly what the future needs. One mainstream historical fact: modern studies have confirmed that field peas naturally fix nitrogen into the soil, reducing the need for synthetic fertilizers. In an era of climate crisis and soil degradation, that makes them a sustainable dream crop. And the flavor? more complex than lentils, nuttier than chickpeas. When cooked slowly with garlic, onion, and stock, they take on a creamy, rich texture. Some chefs are even turning them into plant-based meat substitutes. The same mush that once kept villagers alive is now getting haute cuisine makeovers in test kitchens. Here's your quirky ending. In parts of Denmark and Sweden, heritage cooking festivals now include Pea Week, where locals dress in medieval garb, boil field peas in giant copper pots, and serve them with flatbread and sour cream. Children complain, elders beam. History is tasted, spoon by spoon. Historians still argue whether this renewed interest is nostalgia, necessity, or just a quirky blip in food fashion. But does it matter? The field pea fed the past, and now it's feeding a conversation about resilience, simplicity, and the strange comfort of slow-cooked legacy. Imagine this, a world where we stop chasing only the newest food trend and start remembering the old ones, where fields are once again dotted with low curling vines, where green pods are picked by hand, dried in the sun, and shelled on kitchen tables, where the past doesn't just live in books, but bubbles in a pot on your stove. Peas may not dazzle on Instagram, they're not flashy, they'll never go viral like avocado toast. But in a time when the food system wobbles and the climate bites, it's hard not to root for the crop that never asked for praise. Just a little soil and a lot of time. And maybe, if you walk past a forgotten patch of garden, you'll spot those pale green pods curling in the sun and know that what once fed kingdoms might feed us again. So next time you're spooning up something warm and humble, think of the peas, the quiet little survivors of history. They don't clamor for attention, they don't sparkle, but they've been here through plague, famine, empire, and collapse. They filled bellies when nothing else would grow, and now they wait patiently, tucked into seed vaults and old cookbooks, ready to return if we let them. Let the kettle simmer a little longer tonight. Let the scent of something ancient rise with the steam. After all, some of the best things we ever tasted were forgotten before we even knew to miss them.